Welcome back everyone, back to Austria, back to Formula 1 2020. Today, the Styrian Grand Prix Qualifying session. And goodness me, what a crazy session it was. I find myself saying that a lot so far over the course of these 2 weekends. But wet conditions, no practice this morning, the drivers going in completely blind, a messed up grid. What a session. If you are new around here, feel free to subscribe to keep up to date with all of your Formula 1 2020 news, reviews, all that good stuff. Spoiler warning as always, this is certainly a session I would very much recommend, if possible, you watch beforehand before watching this review. Warning out of the way, your result from today's session looks a little bit like this. Lewis Hamilton smacking about the field, 1.2 seconds clear of the next best driver, Max Verstappen. Hamilton claiming Mercedes' second pole position in a row, the Brits' first of the season. Verstappen, who joined him on the front row for tomorrow's race, pushed him hard, was on a great lap, and it was so tense in those closing stages whether he was just going to be able to pip Hamilton, but a huge slide through the final couple of corners ultimately put pay to that, but still an impressive session from Verstappen lining up alongside Hamilton. But the impressive sessions don't end there. Carlos Sainz, third place for McLaren, 1.3 off Hamilton and just 1/10 away from that front row of the grid, beating also Valtteri Bottas, our championship leader, down in fourth. Esteban Ocon much better today. He had a great session in 5th place, followed by Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, Daniel Ricciardo and Sebastian Vettel rounding out the top 10. Your bottom half, a Ferrari out in Q2 once again this season. Leclerc failing to make it this time round, P11 for the Monegasque driver. George Russell, however, what a lap. What an incredible lap. 12th overall for the Williams driver. The first time they've got through to Q2 since Brazil 2018. The first time Russell has ever got through to Q2 and was so close to getting through to Q3. But take it step by step, Russell. What a session it was. Beating out the likes of Stroll, Danny Kvyat and Magnussen all out in Q2. And Q1, well, that was the session which really kicked everything off. Raikkonen and Giovinazzi both out. Raikkonen 16th, Giovinazzi 19th, Perez 17th, and Nicholas Latifi, his first ever wet conditions in Formula 1. Not too bad actually, 18th place, only a 10th off Sergio Perez, beating Giovinazzi, and Romain Grosjean failed to set a time. And I suppose that's where we'll start our little discussion in a moment. But before we get to running down the grid and talking about today's events, your grid for tomorrow looks a little bit like this. There are some changes from the qualifying order. Keep an eye out. Hamilton and Verstappen share the front row with Sainz and Bottas in close behind. It's then Ocon and Albon on row 3, Gasly, Ricciardo row 4. Norris moves down to 9th place after his 3-place penalty carried over from practice 1, and he will share the 5th row with Sebastian Vettel. Behind them, it's Leclerc and Russell, who will not get free choice of tyres. Obviously, doing qualifying in the wet means every single driver will have free choice tomorrow. Stroll and Kvyat on row 7, Magnussen and Raikkonen row 8, Perez, Latifi, Giovinazzi and Grosjean your top 20. Grosjean may potentially start from the pit lane tomorrow, but no confirmation on that just yet. And now we've got the serious bit out of the way, let's have the discussion about today's session. And I'll start at the back and work my way forward, but what I'll probably do is, for teams like Haas, I'll just discuss them as a team rather than just individuals. But the session itself, what a season 2020 is turning out to be. Wet conditions are always a bit of fun, and I suppose that bit of tension that we weren't quite sure whether qualifying was even going to be able to get underway. Practice this morning, cancelled. Formula 3, cancelled halfway through the race. And the rain continued to pour. There were moments where it was getting dry, but then it would completely thunderstorm and shower once again. But we did eventually get going about half an hour after we initially were planned to get running. But we were able to have a session. We were able to have an awesome session. And ultimately, all of the drivers pretty much keeping out of trouble. And the driving standard today, for the most part, was super high. Only a couple of drivers making mistakes throughout the 3 sessions, very, very impressive. But the one man that never even had a chance to set a lap, Romain Grosjean, went out on an in-store lap like every driver does. Turn 4, where he ended up retiring last time out with brake issues, went off there again. And I assumed, like most people, initially it looked like he just made a mistake, locked up, went straight on. But analysis from the Skypad from Anthony Davidson and Karun Chandok suggesting that once again there could be a brake failure in that by the way he locked up and wasn't able to unlock the brakes. And also that car having more issues because he only went wide a little bit, picked up a little bit of gravel. They had to change the complete rear of that car for whatever reason, whether it was something to do with the brakes, something to do with the battery. Saw something on Twitter suggesting it may have been a fuel leak. Goodness me. Can Grosjean and Haas catch a break? It really doesn't seem like it. And today was one of those days. We saw Russell get P12. This was one of those days where a team like Haas could get a big result. And ultimately Grosjean will start dead last tomorrow with little chance, I would suggest, of picking up points. But fingers crossed for him. Magnussen went a little bit better, just scraping through to Q2, finishing 15th, equals their best of the season. 15th and 16th last time, 15th and 20th today. Not looking good for the American team so far this season. Giovinazzi, 19th place. One of the few drivers to make a mistake, actually, coming through the final corner. Or the gap between the penultimate and final corner, a little bit wide on the apex, lost the car, a little bit of a shimmy down that little straight, into the barriers on the outside, tried to keep it going as debris were just flailing everywhere along that home straight, scattered across the circuit. Ocon did a great little move to get out of the way of some of that rear wing of the Alfa Romeo, had to stop the car though about halfway around the lap, caused a red flag and just cost Nicholas Latifi a chance of improving his lap time. Latifi maybe could have got through to Q2 as well, but Latifi, who was just in front of Giovinazzi, I said a minute ago, did a very, very impressive job. Considering he'd never been in Formula 1 wet conditions before, considering he's in that car, very, very impressive. I mean, it wasn't anything like George Russell's level, but it's his second weekend in Formula 1, guys. Yeah, Latifi, not too bad. But someone who really struggled in wet conditions, Sergio Perez. And it got me thinking, actually, back to last year in Germany. Perez was the first one to retire from that race, and it was a driver incident. And he's not a driver I've ever considered to be bad in wet conditions, but perhaps it's not his preferable choice, and just really struggled out there in the conditions. Didn't necessarily make any glaring and obvious mistakes or crashes or spins like some drivers, but just could never seem to get a competitive lap time on the board. And out in Q1, yes, tomorrow, he could be a hell of a lot of fun to watch, but today, not the result he was looking for, and out-qualified by his teammate, something that he so often did last season, Sergio Perez out-qualifying Lance Stroll. Yeah, he won't be too happy with that, considering you would suggest that the team need to pick up their points now while they're competitive, rather than risk teams like McLaren and Renault catching them up with development over the next few races. And the final driver out in Q1, Kimi Raikkonen, Alfa Romeo just really struggling for pace, and Kimi just couldn't quite sneak through. We spoke about K-Mag, a quiet session, but getting through to Q2, probably the best job he could have done. Danny Kvyat, also a little bit like Magnussen, got through to Q2. That was the target, that was the aim, but as the rain started to come down at the end of Q2, it was really halting the progress from some of these guys. But the real story in that session, Lance Stroll going out. I think a lot of people, well, he's proved he can be very, very quick in the wet. Started on the front row, didn't he, at Monza during wet conditions. Just couldn't quite hook a lap together, and with the rain getting heavier and heavier at the end of Q2, Stroll, Kvyat, Magnussen, Russell, and both Ferraris just couldn't improve. Russell was so close to sneaking through. Another driver he was that just did not put a foot wrong. And 2 weeks in a row now, if he'd have just found 1/10, he would have gone through to the next session. But I don't think it really matters. That's just another... Is it a chimp off his back? Is that the saying? Sounds a bit strange, but we'll roll with it. Just something that he can add on that CV. Finally got through to Q2. What a boost that'll be for Williams. We said last week, we expected them to get into Q3 or Q2 at some point this season. and he's done it in the second race. Will Q3 be the target? Probably not. I think that's a bit too much of a push, but if we get another wet race, potentially, Russell proves today that that car in wet conditions isn't bad, and Russell is a very nifty driver himself in wet conditions, so very good job today, and maybe, just maybe tomorrow, if things go their way, reliability sorts itself out, they could just sneak a couple of points. Leclerc and Vettel, 10th and 11th, I went into this session thinking that, maybe wet conditions, it nullifies the straight line advantage for teams like Mercedes, like Red Bull, McLaren's your Racing Points. And though it really did nullify a team like Racing Point, it didn't make any difference for Ferrari. 2 seconds. Both drivers were pretty much off the fastest time in Q2 for Leclerc and Q3 for Sebastian Vettel. Just could never get it going. And Q3 in particular, Q2 it was strange seeing the Ferraris on the bubble, but Q3, Vettel was just always last. He kind of got close to Ricciardo at about the halfway stage, but never really looked like challenging to get higher than 10th. And even with Norris's penalty, will still start 10th. Yeah, on the bubble for points tomorrow, really not looking good. Ricciardo starts 8th, finished 9th though in qualifying. Not an awful day, better than last weekend, but comfortably beaten by teammate Esteban Ocon. Ricciardo isn't necessarily hailed for being the best driver in wet conditions, but I think his teammate is certainly a driver that is really proving himself to be a bit of a rainmaster, and this is the exact kind of result he needed. More on him in a moment. Gasly, what a session he had. AlphaTauri, we spoke last week, we're kind of in that backpack with the 2 Haas cars, Alfa Romeos and Williams. Really did a great job today, and at certain times I was thinking may have even been even higher, but just qualified 1 place behind Alex Albon. Alex struggled actually in the conditions today, had a bit of a spin in Q1 and never was quite on the level of Max. We do know Max is a bit of a genius in wet conditions, likewise with the Bottas-Hamilton comparison in wet conditions, but Albon I think will be frustrated. He's behind Norris, behind Ocon on qualifying pace, but Norris with that penalty will promote Albon a little bit, and I think in race trim he will certainly be able to make up the difference. Norris though, behind his teammate, but another driver that did a really solid job today, out qualifying the Red Bull of Alex Albon, beating both Ferraris again. McLaren really do have some solid pace. Norris will kick himself, of course, that he's got that penalty, but not a bad job. Esteban Ocon, though, really, really impressed with that drive. I think a lot of people were disappointed with his result last week. I think people were excited to see him return to Formula 1 up against Daniel Ricciardo. And Ricciardo, all the way through last weekend, was the better of the two. And I think a lot of people weren't massively surprised at that. But what a fight back today was. What a pretty much faultless drive from Esteban Ocon. Should that car be anywhere near those front 3 rows? Probably not. And yet there he is. 1 place behind Bottas, 2 in front of Albon. Great drive from the Frenchman, and a real statement of intent actually. It will just be frustrating for him that he's trying to put himself in the shop window for Mercedes, and whilst that was a banging session for Ocon, it was just as great for Russell. So he's probably thinking, come on, I'm trying to prove myself in wet conditions and Russell's done just as good. But still, great session for Ocon. Bottas, our championship leader, down in 4th, was doing all right in the early stages, but when push came to shove at the end of Q3, couldn't hook a lap together, and Carlos Sainz will out-qualify him. P3 for the Spaniard. How cool was that? Seeing the McLaren pull up in that 3rd place position in Parc Ferme, doing the little driver interview afterwards. I always find it funny when it's a team that's not Red Bull, not Ferrari. And when was the last time that happened? I want to say it was Ocon at 2018 Spa. I don't think last season we had another car in qualifying. God, I know we had Ricciardo 4th in Canada, and we had, I think, Ricciardo 4th or 5th again, actually, in Italy. But yeah, Sainz, that could be the first time since 2018 Ocon. I'd love to know how wrong I am. I'd love to, if you've got the actual answer in the comment section below. But still, Sainz, great job. McLaren really proving they want to be best of the rest and 3rd place this year, and I really do think they can do it. They might not have the 3rd quickest car, but that driver pairing is sorting them right out. Great job. And then it was the 2 that we pretty much assumed would be at the front in wet conditions, Hamilton and Verstappen. The fight was on. But Verstappen, that mistake through the final couple of corners, maybe Sebastian Vettel was on the inside, came into the pit lane, maybe that put him off a little bit. I'm not really too sure. However, it did cost him a shot at pole position. But realistically, starting on the front row, that's pretty much just as good. He'll be a little bit frustrated, he'll kick himself, but he started second now for the last 3 races in Austria, and I think he'll be okay. But Hamilton, wow, faultless. Last weekend wasn't his best, this weekend might just be, and he was so good in Q3, so good throughout the day. I've given him my driver of the day. What a lap from Lewis. I had initially given it to George Russell. I'd even made the graphic for George Russell after Q2. I thought, oh, there's no way anyone can beat that. And then that final lap of Hamilton all came together, smashed it. Easy driver of the day. And I often find I don't give enough love for the driver who wins or finishes pole, but certainly Hamilton warranted it today. I mean, Russell, Ocon, Gasly, Sainz, all of those in the mix, but Hamilton, just that one lap in Q3 edges it for me. Ones to watch then for tomorrow's Grand Prix. No surprise, I've put Lance Stroll and also Sergio Perez as my true one to watch for tomorrow's race. Both racing points. A lot of catching up to do. I've put Lando Norris on there as well with that penalty. Will he be able to fight with the likes of Ricciardo and Vettel? That's going to be a fun one to watch. And George Russell as well, starting 12th. Can he nab some points in tomorrow's race? And just before I leave you, tomorrow it's race day, it's Grand Prix time, the first ever Styrian Grand Prix. Formula 2 is set to be 10 past 10, however, depending on if the feature race goes ahead tonight, will all depend on what the real schedule is. So what I would advise is just keep an eye out on Twitter tomorrow to see what changes there are. But at the moment, sprint race at 10 past 10 and the Formula 1 Grand Prix kicks off at 10 past 2. I'd love to know your thoughts on driver of the day. Who is going to win tomorrow? I think Lewis and Max are going to have a great fight all race long. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new. Thank you all very much for watching and hope to see you in the next one.